Welcome back. So this will be lecture 8, where we'll continue our discussions on the clinical considerations for AI model deployment. So this will be the part 2 of the lecture. So what we saw in the previous few slides was that for the first half of today's lecture was what are the different factors that we need to consider when deploying the model in clinic. And let's say that you have different kinds of AI models that have been trained. What's next, right? So first, how do we pick a model for clinical use? Which vendor? Now this is important because if you remember, we discussed that for a particular solution, so let's say that you're working on detection of lung cancer, of lung nodules, and this is a well researched problem, which means there are multiple vendors that can provide you or that do provide you solutions for the same problem, right? I mean, similar to what goes on here. So if there's an equipment you have to order, I'm sure there's some sort of process where you invite some bids, some tenders, right? And then the institute will have some policy to decide which vendor to go with. So along similar lines, if there are multiple different vendors, how does a clinic choose which vendor to go with? Who is going to use it? So that is also very important, right? So who the eventual end user will be? What are the metrics of success? And more importantly, what are the post-deployment considerations? So once the model has been deployed, what are the different aspects, what are the different factors that we have to consider for making sure that the model keeps getting used for that particular task? So yes, eventually we want a product because the product is what will be used in the clinic. But what the hospitals look for is not a product. They look for a partner, because just the way AI models are being developed and they are being deployed in the clinic, it's not like we get the model, we deploy it in a hospital and forget about it. It's a partnership. It's a two-way street, right? So if you see, a lot of times what happens is when you approach, or when a vendor approaches the clinic saying that a hospital saying that yes, we have a solution, it's a wonderful solution, they will show a demo, and that demo will work amazingly well, right? And it's like, okay, this is like the next best thing. Like I want to get this to my clinic right away. But we should not get carried away by that. So if you are, let's say, and it's not like every one of you will do core research or get into machine learning, but you might end up in let's say some sort of a department that's actually involved in purchasing decisions, right? So you will have that AI expertise, you will know what goes into this model training and testing, but eventually let's say that you complete your management degrees or whatever, and you do end up in these different enterprises where you deal with purchasing of AI systems. Now, you should understand, and this is very critical, that especially in the healthcare domain, if a demo works, that doesn't mean that it will work all the time in the clinic. And in fact, it's not just healthcare domain. So that's why if you look at self-driving cars, they have been, the different systems have been slowly developed over the years, and now finally you have these self-driving cars that are sort of out there in the market. Still in India, it's still you don't really have. I mean, I know that a couple of Teslas are currently making their way into the Indian market. I think Rohit Sharma just purchased one a couple months ago. I saw on the news. But the self-driving capabilities, the autopilot capabilities of Tesla still doesn't work well on Indian roads, right? Because it's not optimized for that. So we need to know that what sort of data sets these models are optimized for. Defines clear ROI, return on investment, not region of interest, return on investment. So you have to define clear return on investment, and you have to align. So it has to be aligned with incentives across the stakeholders. And by stakeholders, I mean when it comes to a hospital, you have so many different stakeholders. You have the clinicians, you have the patients, you have the insurance, insurance agencies, right? So because eventually, when the treatments are done, patients will get reimbursed, hospitals will get reimbursed, and so on, right? So how does it align with the incentives across the different stakeholders? Improves continuously using data, feedback, and scientific rigor, right? So there was a question raised where one of you asked, what is there a facility where data can be fed back from the hospital to the system to improve their model training? This should be taken into account. So before you deploy or before you consider deploying an AI system in the clinic, you should ask the vendors, can our system, like can our hospitals, can our doctors actually give you some of the cases to improve the model training in case the model is not working well, or if we identify some of the cases where our model does not work well, right? So you have to be very careful as to if the models will let you incorporate their data for training and how that can be done, and that's when the legalities come in. And scientific rigor, right? So they should be open to the idea that if the model does not work well for certain cases, they have to be open to the idea that, okay, now it doesn't work well, let's change it, or if at some point can we stop using the software? So there are different ways of licensing. There's this exclusive licensing, non-exclusive licensing, many of these different things. We won't get into the details of that. But you have to be careful in which, like, do you sign a multi-year partnership or do you sign a single-year partnership? Like, how do you do that, right? So you have to somehow de-risk it, because eventually ROI is what matters. So the vendors, they have to understand the radiologist workflow. So they have to engage with the RAD users. It's not like, yes, we have a system, we give you the output, and you visualize the output on your system. They have to know, the vendors have to know how to integrate with the PACS system, right? So that is very critical, and that's one of the things that we as academic researchers, we don't really have a clear idea about how we can do that. That is why we work with people who understand the PACS system, who understand the clinical PACS and research PACS. You work with the hospital IT to see how this can be done. Efficient with the regulatory clearance process, right? So you have to, so when you are in the discussion stage with the vendors, you have to talk to them regarding where they are with their FDA approval, right? First of all, it also depends on what sort of approval it needs. FDA has different classes of device depending on how it eventually leads to treatment management. There's class 1, class 2, class 3. There are different pathways, like 510K. There's a PMA pathway, so there are different kinds of pathways, and based on which these products are approved. So one common pathway is, so let's say that there's a product that already exists that does segmentation, and you have a new product that you have built that does that same segmentation. You tell the FDA that there's this product that already exists, I want to do something similar, right? So there's a precedent that already exists, so you don't have to go through that entire process again. Right? So a lot of regulatory aspects has to be taken care of. Now finally, you have to have a shared mission, values, and there should be a long-term vision. It's not just a product. Like eventually, like I said, it's a partnership that you have to develop with the company. So how to evaluate AI clinical performance? You look at performance statistics. If it's segmentation, you look at dice codes, dice similarity coefficients. You look at something called Hausdorff distance, different sort of overlap metrics. But more importantly, for clinicians, for a hospital, did the AI enhance detection, and what time savings did it lead to, right? So if a doctor can do it in 5 seconds and your AI takes 1 hour, what's the use of having that system, right? So you need to have measures regarding time savings. I mean, return of investment, obviously. Return of investment is not something, let's say, is not something you can control as a researcher. When you are working for a team for your company will have people in the financial department who make these decisions, right? But you can control how much time it takes. Like you can try to make your system faster as an AI developer to control how much time it takes to essentially make that decision, right? So that you can do. That the financial experts, the financial department cannot do for you. Right? So, but the hospitals will see if the system, once it's deployed, will result in any time saving. And something that is very important is yes, your model takes, let's say in the inference stage, if you want to detect or segment out tumor on a given case, it would take 10 seconds for your model to run. That does not mean that it will take 10 seconds from the time the image comes in to the time the doctor actually sees the output. It takes 10 seconds for the image, for the inference process to run on your system, right? But now you have to deploy the system on the cloud or on-prem depending on whatever resources they are. And not just that, there is additional time. The image has to come in from the PACS. So in your lab, you already have the images on your system, right? But there in the hospital, the image has to be pulled from the PACS. You have to do some pre-processing, and then you have to run your pipeline, and then you have to push it back to the PACS. So there's T1 plus T2 plus T3 plus T4 involved there. It's not just T2, which is the time that it takes to run the model on your computer, right? So you have to take into account all these different things. Is AI helpful in detecting cases that could be considered the wow cases? So what does that mean? So a lot of times what happens is there's this concept of incidental findings. So there what happens, so let's say that the doctor is reviewing an X-ray scan or a CT scan for a particular condition, but when they're reading that image, they will see that, oh, there's something else that needs immediate attention, right? So they're looking for disease A, but they eventually end up, yes, finding or not finding disease A, but they also end up finding disease B or finding some signals that can point to disease B. If your software can help the doctors do that, that's a good software, right? Because it can help you identify some incidental conditions. And identifying these incidental conditions, it's a big area of research. And a lot of this is actually done in the NLP domain, where once the reports, the pathology reports or the radiology reports are identified, what the NLP systems, what the AI systems would tell you is, yes, there is disease A, but looks like there is some finding that is reflective of disease B. So it should be immediately referred to the right doctor. A lot of times these incidental findings are missed. We do not want to do that. So remember we covered like these 1 or 2 slides on the dental AI where we were looking at small calcifications, and I told you how these calcifications could be indicative of cardiovascular risk. Now if dentists are not trained to even think that these calcifications could lead to some adverse cardiovascular outcome, why would they even care about it, right? So you also have to train the doctors that if you have certain findings, then please do another read and try to refer to the right expert to see if there's something else that might be there. Okay. Understand and categorize the false positives. So there can be different false positives. So your system should be able to identify what these are, should be able to categorize, and should be able to do a further downstream analysis. So if your system doesn't do that, if the system doesn't do that directly, it's fine. But at least their team, the company's team, the technical team should work with you. So you should tell them, you should have a facility where you can tell them that, these are the false positives that we are identifying. Could we do an analysis on that, right? Why are these the false positive? What's different between, or false negatives? What's different between these classifications or these conditions as compared to the true predictions that maybe caused the model to falsely classify it, right? So what's going there? Can we try to understand it, right? So yes, it's a research problem. Clinicians might not always have the time to sit with the technical personnel to discuss this, but at least if your company has a team like that, so let's say that you're going into a company, you become a CEO or a CTO of a company. One of the value additions, so you have another company which does exactly the same thing. So again, a lot of this is something that you will learn in a management class, but let's say that you are the CTO of a company, you can actually have a portfolio where you tell them that, yes, my system can give you X percentage of accuracy, X percentage of AUC or F1 score or whatever, but we are also willing to work with the doctors to understand what the false positives are, what the false negatives are. Now, as soon as the doctors hear this, they'll say, okay, you give us something else, right? It's not just the product you are giving us. Along with the product, you are giving us something that we can use to improve the product, or that can be helpful for research, that can be helpful for the general community, for the scientific community, right? So these are the kinds of things that they would want to know. Okay, so performance statistics. So these are some of the different metrics. So the number of cases analyzed, what size of the what is the data set size that the model was trained on, prevalence. So sometimes what happens is you have a lot of class imbalance. We'll cover that in the next slide. What's the sensitivity, which is the percentage of true positive cases correctly detected. What's the specificity, which is the number of true negatives that is correctly rejected. What is the positive predictive value, negative predictive value. So I won't really cover these. So you can easily go to Wikipedia, or you can add in. So these are very common machine learning metrics that are used to evaluate model performance. AUC, accuracy. Accuracy is very simple. What is the percentage of cases that was correctly classified out of the total number of cases, right? So these are some of the common performance statistics that are useful, and your model should try to report on each of this. So just reporting on accuracy is not correct. If there's a class imbalance, you go for balanced accuracy or a balanced AUC. You have like a macro F1 score. I think someone had this question, this weighted F1 score, macro F1 score. So try to convince to the best extent possible to the clinician that yes, you have evaluated on your model on all possible metrics that are necessary for that particular problem. So coming to that, prevalence is very, very important, and I'll tell you why. So by the way, why is accuracy not a good metric? Anyone? So what is accuracy? The number of correctly classified cases divided by the total number of cases, right? So why is accuracy not a good metric?
If there is severe class imbalance, then there could be cases like, let's say 90% are class 1 and 10% is class B, and if you happen to say everything, if the model says everything is class 1, then you are getting it correct 90% of the times.
Right, good. So, I'll go to a more extreme example. So let's say you had 100 cases, and the task is to detect a tumor, okay, and only one out of the 100 cases, only one is a tumor, and the 99 cases are not tumor or benign. Now, your model, the model that you have trained, it calls all the cases as benign, okay, which means your model is how much accurate? 99%. But is that a good model? No, because you are missing that one tumor case which is more important for the doctor to find, right? Because if you miss that tumor case, you will not give the correct treatment that might end up being fatal for the patient. As opposed to, let's say that your model tells you that 90 of the 100 cases are benign and 10 cases are tumor, right? So what is the accuracy of this model if it calls the tumor case correctly? So what is the accuracy of the model? 91%, right? It calls the tumor case correctly also. So right, so it's a 91. The model is 91% correct, but it is possibly a better model than the 99% model because you are getting that tumor correctly. Yes, there is a risk of over treating 9 of the benign cases, which can have adverse effects, hopefully not that adverse. It depends on the situation, obviously depends on the case, but at least you are getting that one tumor case correctly, right? So that is why prevalence, class imbalance, all of these things matter. Potentially they don't matter for probably they don't matter for a cats versus dogs problem, right? So that is why healthcare AI, medical AI is very different. It's a very different beast compared to the other AI systems that are out there. So I don't know if you heard this news. It was, I think, 3 days ago. Somewhere in California, these Waymo cars, self-driving cars. There was a power outage. Okay, so the entire city had a power outage, and the cars just stopped where they were. So it was a mess. Like the cars didn't really know what to do. So it was a mess. Okay, so these are actually some of the corner cases. I don't know what really happened there, but I'm sure the engineers would have anticipated a scenario where there will be power outage, right? Some sort of, let's say, adversarial attacks, some sort of attacks that might happen to the power system. It will go out. Yeah, so these are the kinds of things that you have to be careful about when it comes to training these AI models. Okay, so yeah, so that covers prevalence. Let's go to some of the performance statistics. So clinicians, yes, AUCs are great, accuracies are great. Some of the performance metrics are great, but acceptance, trust is probably more important than that. So you need to get radiologists buy-in. You need to get that level of engagement from radiologists for a model to say that the model is good or not, right? So for example, let's say that you have a model here that is 99% accurate, but none of the radiologists are using it, but you have a model that is 95% accurate, and you can tell VCs, you can tell funders, the different funding agencies that already 10 hospitals are using it, you will get more money. They won't get money, right? Because you already have buy-in from the radiologists. So here's sort of a one sheet, and there are different criteria that could be added to this, but these are some of the criteria that could be used for, let's say, deciding how good a product is. Should we go for this product or not? Should we buy from this vendor or not? And you can go through this. Maybe I'll touch on a few things. Let's say engineering capability, right? So you would obviously go with a company that is proven has scalable engineering organization, as opposed to a company that is maybe outsourcing its functionalities to some other team, right? There are a lot of consultancies which do work on medical projects, but a lot of doctors might not like it. So if the company has their own in-house team that works on it, that's always better than if that company is outsourcing some of the technical functionalities for a particular product, right? Integration experience. So like I said, there are so many startups that are coming up. I was at RSNA, like I told you a few weeks ago. The startup, the vendor floor was filled. It was full with startups. Like we had at least a couple hundred startups there, and they were doing all new things. But if you spoke to them, you immediately find out that not many of them actually had systems that could integrate with PACS, right? Not everyone thinks it through. Okay, we have a new product. Let's quickly get it out. Okay, let's start to make a big deal about it. Let's start to make a noise about it. But you should understand that it's not just getting the product ready. You should know how to integrate with PACS. If you don't know, identify partners who can help you integrate with PACS. So what else? Security. So if your product already takes into account patient security, privacy, that's a much better product as compared to a product that does not take that into account. Yeah. So what are the other things? Medical standards, right? So sometimes what happens is it's usually not the case. If there is a company, they would know what the medical standards are, so they would store their images in the right standard. But sometimes you don't really have all the functionalities, right? They will just have the basic import-export functionalities. Other products will have other functionalities which let you not just import and export, but play around with the data, convert it into multiple different formats. So we saw with some of the examples that you tried out in the hands-on session, you had nifty formats, right? You can have DICOM formats. You can also save the image as PNG or JPEG. Don't do that. So you have these native imaging formats. If a vendor supports these multiple imaging formats, that's a much more flexible, let's say, software as compared to another vendor that provides a format that provides a software that only takes into account one format, right? So those are also the things that you should consider while deciding whether to go with a particular vendor, a particular software or not. Those are the technical evaluation strategies. So it's not just about a cool AI model, it's also about the time, right? So does it result in any time savings? So this was a simple study that we did a year ago, where we were looking at the efficiency of an attention-based deep learning network for identifying pulmonary embolism in CT scans. So yes, we had this attention-based mechanism that we used for identifying if the CT images had pulmonary embolism or not. But the more important thing for us in this particular project was how much time savings it led to. Okay, so our system was called AID-PE. So on the y-axis you see the time taken, on the x-axis you see the study number. We had about 140, 150 studies, and these are time taken in seconds. So we clearly see that the time taken for our system to ingest the image and give you the output was about in the order of seconds, as compared to how much time it took for the image to actually come in and get the output from the radiologists, where it was in the order of minutes. Now, this clearly shows time savings, like this is an order of time savings, right? So, if even if you look at this case, which takes 10 minutes, 10 minutes is what, 600 seconds, and even if you take our model that takes 10 seconds or 7 seconds here, that's an order of magnitude change in how much time it takes. So these are the kinds of, let's say, evaluations that need to be done. It's not just accuracy, AUC, sensitivity, specificity, whatever. So you need to look at time savings. So I also discussed briefly about the wow cases. So in radiology, you can have so if you're looking for something else, an abdominal CT on a routine abdominal CT scan, you can have an unexpected finding, right? Sometimes you can have these metastasis regions somewhere where you're looking for something else, but you find metastatic cancer, right? So that those are examples of incidental findings, or findings which the radiologist is not primarily looking for, but they find it. So the key point is AI, just to summarize, it's not just about more sensitivity. It can expand, it should expand what the radiologists notice and not just what they confirm. It's the balance that matters. So false positive. So there are different false positive buckets into which we can categorize the misclassifications. So what are they? So you can have anatomic mimics. So sometimes you can have hemorrhages. You can have artifacts that look like hemorrhages, but they're not hemorrhages. You can have technical artifacts. So because of patient motion, you see certain artifacts that occur in the image. In dental images, we have seen a lot of artifacts. You can have implants. So implants can be, whatever material they're made of. If they're metallic or something, they can interact with the electrical field around it, right? So that can create some artifacts. A lot of times, benign pathology is flagged as disease. So you can have some finding that was identified long ago. Now, when doctors look at it, they might say that, okay, this looks like a new disease. That's not the case. You can have post-surgical or treated changes. So a lot of times what happens is, let's say in the context of brain tumors, right after treatment, right after surgery, you'll have a lot of movement of the brain tissue, right? So if you just take that image immediately and show it to a doctor without providing them context of when that image was taken, they'll be like, okay, I don't know what's going on. Maybe there's some disease here, something is happening, there's a lot of infiltration. But if you tell them that the surgery was done 2 days before, I mean, most likely they'll know it because they're trained to look at these images. But if you tell them that these images were, these patients were treated a day ago, 2 days ago, they'll be like, okay, these are some immediate treatment related changes. Or if you remember radiation necrosis. So radiation necrosis is a treatment related change, right? Because of radiation treatment, you have the cells dying. There is necrotic tissue which can mimic tumor on MRI scans, right? So out of distribution cases, so there might be contrast phase mismatch. There might be some scanners which are poor in quality. So this leads to out of distribution cases. Label disagreement. So we covered this in the last session. While you are collecting data, you can have disagreement between radiologists. They can have different interpretations. We need to arrive at consensus. Sometimes the interpretations will be correct, but the way they arrive at the decisions will be different. This is a very interesting machine learning problem, the reasoning aspect of it. And then obviously you can have false positives where AI flags, but case is already read. So these nuisance false positives, right? So yeah. So post-deployment considerations. So you outline the role of physicians when working with these AI tools. So you need to clearly define how medical professionals, clinicians will interact and leverage the AI system in practice. You need to have this human AI feedback loop. Ideally, there should be a way to enable radiologists to flag incorrect or unsafe outputs and provide that data back to the vendor, to the machine learning engineers. Clinical and ethical oversight. Define the ownership where AI disagrees with radiologists, you need to monitor bias across different subgroups and reevaluate performance, whenever protocols change. So a lot of times protocols can change. So if they do change, if there are new images that are obtained, you need to reevaluate the performance of the models. And detect post deployment distribution shift. So we spoke about distribution shift in detail. So need to monitor AI's performance after deployment in order to find out if any of the changes in the data patterns, there is new data being collected. So let's say that the hospital had a GE scanner, immediately they are moving to a Philips scanner. So completely it's a distribution shift. Does our model work on the cases obtained from the Philips scanner, right? So you need to detect this post deployment. You need to analyze the post deployment, the changes arising from the post deployment scenarios. So going from bottom up, you have the technical performance evaluation, where you can have external validation, you do the robustness analysis, then you have workflow and usability evaluation, how easy it is to use the product. I mean, you might have a great product, but what if you have a very complicated UI? Like it gets difficult for the doctor to figure out, okay, you click this, where do you click? You need to make their job easier as well. You need to have a very intuitive interface for them to work with. Like you can't ask them, yes, you have a model, I mean, just a very extreme scenario, you can't ask them to fire up the Linux terminal and run it, right? Now let's say, obviously you don't do that, you have a UI, that UI cannot be very complicated, it has to be very user friendly, right? Clinical effectiveness, so the diagnosis accuracy, patient outcomes, does it actually help improve patient outcomes? So one of the things that hospitals could also do is they will have a trial run, and based on that they try out the AI model, and then they see what sort of let's say effectiveness arises out of it, right? So does it improve patient outcomes? If it does, after that trial run, they actually go for a full subscription. That's what they do as well. And then compliance and accountability and bias assessment. We need to keep doing that. So here's a readiness checklist. For data infrastructure, you have scalability, processing, and you have to make sure that to the best extent possible, your model is future ready. So will your data infrastructure, so it's not like you have the capability of ingesting 1,000 studies, but in the future, if you are expecting an increase in workflow, what if you don't have that infrastructure, right? You have to make sure that you are future ready. In data governance, data quality management, a lot of these things are very important. And in data validation, you have to make sure that you do your proper data profiling, measurement, and so on. Okay, finally, the last slide here, what are the do's and don'ts? Do's: use real clinical workflows for model design if possible. At least once you have designed your model, try to have cases from your real clinical workflow to validate, to test your model. If possible, get data from multiple institutions, multiple scanners. Most likely the data sets that you are already working with would have been collected from multiple scanners. So when you do your analysis, see or try to investigate if there is performance difference across scanners, across institutions, and report that in your papers, in your reports. Include explainability when relevant. So a lot of times, explainability might not be relevant. For example, if it's a segmentation problem or a nuclei detection problem, doesn't really matter how your model makes its decision as long as your model does a good job. But if there is an explanation that can be provided, let's say with Gecko, right? So we can provide an explanation as to why the model arrived at a particular decision. If you can do that, then definitely include that. So that makes their jobs easier, and it also makes it more interesting. So plan deployment early. So if you're working on a project, and I was having this discussion over tea half an hour ago, if you know that you are working on a product or the project that eventually has the potential of becoming a product, right? If you're already collaborating with a clinician, start to think about deployment aspects early in the process rather than after you have published a paper. Because after you have done that, it almost would seem like you are going back to the drawing board and starting from page 0 rather. Then try to monitor post deployment shifts. What are the don'ts? don't build models in isolation from the clinicians. If there is even the slightest chance that the model that you're working on, that the tools and techniques you are developing will someday help the clinicians, try to involve them in the conversations. Again, this is easier said than done, obviously, because it's difficult to find clinicians. It's difficult to find clinicians who would be interested in that research. But that's what research is about, right? You have to go out of your way to reach out to people, to reach out to clinicians who might be interested in your work. There will be failures along the way. You will probably reach out to 20 people, only two of them might respond, and only one of them might be interested. But keep doing that till you find that person, right? Who can help you out, who can at least give you some assurance that the model that you're working will help them, right? Otherwise, it just stays as a paper. Report only internal test accuracy. Don't do that. You have to report external accuracy as well. Don't expect radiologists to trust black boxes blindly. There will be times where you have to provide interpretation, you have to provide explanations. Be ready for that. Treat deployment as an afterthought. I mean, I think we covered that. You have to start thinking about deployment from the very early stages, and don't assume that the model stays accurate forever. The models, it's just the nature of data. It's just the nature of models. So think about yourself, right? Nowadays there are so many different diseases being discovered. I mean, you can argue that there's more tests being done nowadays, but the human body is changing, right? Over the years, it's just the nature of evolution. It's changing. Right? So everything changes. AI models also, they won't retain the same level of performance compared to what they were 10 years ago. Right? So don't assume that the model stays accurate forever. The vendors have to keep improving their model with newer data, with more complicated data, with more heterogeneous data. Okay, let's end with questions, if any.
I have question around how do we, so for example, let's say a hospital, we provided some solutions and how do we quantify the efficacy of that solution? I mean, what are the best practices around it?
So these are the things that we can ensure, right? So, okay, so just to, let's say, give you an example of a couple best practices. So effectiveness of the solution. So one of the things is how does it help in improving the workflow, right? So by that, how can you quantify that? Only one aspect is time, right? So how long does it take the model to make a decision, make a decision from the point where the image or the data is ingested to the point where the output is given? How much time does it take versus how much time does it take for the clinician on the floor to do that? That is one way of assessing effectiveness. The second way is, so if it's let's say a costly test or a costly AI model, it will cost the hospital something, right? Can they get that money reimbursed by the insurance companies, right? So that's something that also has to be taken into account. Or if they are charging the patient, can the patient be reimbursed for whatever the cost is? So eventually the insurance has to pay for it, right? So that's one way. So that's one way of assessing effectiveness. So other ways would be with the time that is saved, what is it that the radiologists can do in that additional time, right? If they're reading 10 cases now, with AI, do they read 15 cases? But if you think about that, that can also lead to physician burnout, right? So there has to be some balance. So these are the kinds of things, it's not simple. So these are some of the things that have to be considered. Yeah.
Sir, I want to add to your questions answer regarding that
sure.
effectiveness. So you talked about that one for effectiveness and all. So who is responsible if AI model misdiagnoses a patient? In that case, whether AI developer or the radiologist, who is responsible for
So
that?
that's an ongoing debate. So currently, and probably for the most part, the clinician will be responsible because they're the ones who have to make the eventual decisions. They're the ones who will make decisions that will alter the course of treatment. But I think, I'm sure, with the current governance, there are discussions going on as to AI developers have to take some responsibilities, right? Everything cannot lie with the clinician. Otherwise, if that's the case, then they would never trust a model. They'll never be okay deploying it. So, but a lot of that actually comes from how much convincing that model is. Like, if the AI vendors are transparent with the doctors as to what the model was trained on, what was it validated on, if they can tell the doctor that these are the kinds of errors that the model can cause, then the doctors will obviously have more trust. Even though, so they will use that model knowing that the model can give them these errors, right? They'll be comfortable. As opposed to a model which is entirely black box where they don't know, and then if the model causes an error, they have to take the responsibility, right? Because eventually, I think the way this field is moving, the doctors will have to take the responsibility for the most part. Yeah.
And I want to go back to the last day session, sir. Last one. What safeguards are needed to provide to prevent misinterpretations of the clinical?
Sorry, what was the question again?
Safeguards to prevent misinterpretations for interpretability and explainability.
So
for the generated outputs, generative outputs, generative Gen AI outputs.
Okay, so what are the steps that could be taken to prevent misinterpretations?
Misinterpretations.
So in what context? So when you, so first of all,
for generative AI outputs, sir, we have discussed last day.
Yeah. So one of the things. So first of all, Gen AI outputs, Gen AI models are not really being used in the clinic. Eventually, when they make their way into the clinic, what we have to do, some of it we had discussed previously. So these Gen AI models, one of the things that we have to do is the metrics that we use for evaluating how good the Gen AI models are, they have to be very domain specific. Okay, so if you remember, we discussed this FID score. We clearly, and the PSNR score or some of the SSIM scores. So these are metrics that might be good for evaluating Gen AI models from a more, let's say, natural image perspective or from non-medical data perspective. But as soon as you go to medical data, these metrics are not the best metrics. So one of the safeguards that we can have in place is evaluate the Gen AI outputs on metrics that make sense clinically, right? So one of the, not Gen AI, but if you look at the report generation project, you can look at scores like Blue scores, Rouge scores, Meteor scores, which just look at, how the, 4 words, 3 words, or whatever combination you take, if what you are predicting is the same as what was there in the ground truth report. But that's not the case, right? What if you had a not in the output? Right, you would still have those words, but you have a not in the output, right? So which means the clinical efficacy becomes more important. So you have to design metrics that are more related or close to the domain rather than just taking metrics from general computer vision or NLP, right? So these kinds of metrics and safeguards could be in place.